Chat. Hi, Denis. Nice to see you again after 9 years. Actually, being face to face. It is a pleasure, and thanks very much for your time. I've been always following your work, and unfortunately, I did have the chance to be in Brazil when you were there with Luigi, because I'm growing family, so I'm making babies, so I had to stay in Portugal. But I have been following your work, and you are like one of the masters in strength training. And also now that you are in the rugby world, and there is something that I have been not at the moment, but is one of my passions. So I create these conversations on Saturdays like it was a match day.
Yeah,
so
great.
we can remember a little bit rugby. So Denis, just a quick introduce to about yourself and to the Portuguese followers. Just like a short one, since we had been EXOS and then so far. So
yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, Carlos. Like we were just saying, it definitely doesn't feel like it's been 9 years. It's crazy. I was even commenting to my wife last night. She said, "Who are you talking to tomorrow?" And I said, "Carlos." And she said, "Carlos." And when I said who you were, she was like, "Oh yeah, I see him all the time on Facebook." So we've done a pretty good job of staying in each other's lives, even though we don't talk to each other as much. Denis Logan. I am a strength and conditioning coach. I'm currently in Ireland at the moment, working with a rugby team out here. I've been in strength and conditioning for the last 16 years. A large portion of my career I spent at EXOS, where you and I met, and I worked there in a number of different positions. Primarily what we do is coaching, but I was involved in education. I worked with the military. I was involved in the development of college football players for the NFL Combine and the draft process for those that are familiar with American football and the NFL. Like I said, I was there for about 9.5 years. After that, I took a position as an assistant strength and conditioning coach with the Cleveland Browns. So I did. I wanted to hopefully take what I learned at EXOS and see if it would work for a professional sports team. For those that are unfamiliar with EXOS, we primarily work with private companies, and so we'll work with athletes, but in a private setting, and we'll also work with professional teams. I'm sorry, but not in the football world. So EXOS had a huge presence working with soccer, football as it is here in Europe, and tennis and some other sports. I was in Cleveland for about a year, and then I got an opportunity to enter into the rugby world over here in Europe, specifically here in Ireland, and I've been here for the last 2 years. This week is actually 2 years since I've been in Ireland.
Crazy already.
Yeah, my wife reminded me that we had left yesterday 2 years ago to come here. So yeah.
Okay, so taking your words, how was it go from EXOS and implement all the things we've been doing in EXOS in a team setup?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think what you'll find, or I think what I had found was a lot of the concepts that were utilized at EXOS are utilized everywhere else, right? So when you think about the core pillars as they're named at EXOS: movement, mindset, nutrition, recovery, which is kind of what we base our system off of. You're going to find that those are the core pillars any and everywhere you go. But what I can say is that at EXOS, because of the nature of the company and because it was a private company, and quite frankly, because we were not necessarily under the pressure of playing games or things of that nature, it was a very controlled environment for us. The organization of it and the delivery of it was probably a bit more streamlined than you'll find on a professional team, right? So I think professional teams in some way or another are doing it. However, the synchronicity, the way the elements speak together, and the consistency of it clearly was better managed at EXOS than I've found in professional sports, just because it's not as chaotic there. Yeah.
And actually I've been speaking with all the coaches that I had in EXOS, and
Yeah.
I did Darcy, I did Nick. Um, so one of the things they said is when they experience, so Darcy, everybody come to Europe. So, and one of the things that they found was in team setups, we are already taking care of nutrition, mindset, but there is not the connection, and it's not link everything as we do, you guys, or you did in EXOS, that everything is connected and everything is very well synchronized and everything work in perfection. Do you think there is something they are still missing in teams, and especially now that you are in Europe, did you notice that all that synchronization, like the wheel functions very, very well?
Yeah, and to be fair, Carlos, one, I do think that it's something that's missing. But to be fair, it takes time. I think what's happening, like I said, when you have a private company that can dedicate and quite honestly build a brand off of that and build their product around it, and EXOS started doing it in the late 90s, right? They were founded in 1999. So you're talking about 21 years of dedication to trying to get this to work. Whereas in fairness to a lot of newer, this is still very new as a concept for professional teams, right? To have a dedicated professional in nutrition versus just the strength coach doing it all, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
the strength coach would be the movement guy, the conditioning guy, the nutrition guy, the stretching expert, the everything. And now the respect for each individual component is starting to show with teams, but they just don't know how to put it all together. They figure putting it all together means having somebody do it, right? Like, I think at this point, it's kind of like, well, we've got a nutritionist, we've got a conditioning guy, we've got a sports science guy, we've got a strength conditioning coach. They should just all know how to work together. We went and got them all, and it's not that simple. Figuring out how each component speaks to each other, and then how it fits within the greater structure of playing games, training, and marrying that with the coach's vision is the next layer that I think interrupts the synchronicity, but I think it will get better.
Yeah, I think we still we are in the right way, and some of the professional teams, like for example in soccer, and you go after to rugby, but in soccer they are already doing, and they are starting to build all that well done synchronized wheel that everybody speak with each other. The players when they arrive, they're all the questionnaires and all the setups. So I think we are in the right track. Denis, when you arrive on, for example, on Broncos, so you arrive there as a strength coach, what is the things, like, just to start, what are the things that you check up, and what are the things that for you are the most important things?
Are you speaking about, like, specifically, like, coming into a new team? What are the things that I'm looking for?
In strength. So imagine if I hire you to work on my soccer team.
Yeah. So the first thing that I wanted to look for, and if we're not just talking about organization, right? But let's just say the last topic that we mentioned, how are these things working together? That's probably the first thing that I'm going to look at. Aside from that, if I'm looking at programming, right? So if I want to say, all right, what are we doing from a strength and conditioning standpoint, from a programming standpoint? What I've tried to do more than anything else as of recent is look at first principles, right? So I've asked myself, what are the first principles of strength and conditioning? What are things fundamentally that have to exist for a strength and conditioning program to be sound? And see to what degree that's being done in the space that I'm in, because I believe if those things are missing, there'll always be a bit of a crack missing, right? So philosophically, for me, I've got two philosophical phrases that I'll follow. One, in terms of my design, I believe that you have to have the ability to express force at critical ranges of motion above the rate demanded, right? So I believe that athletes and players have to have movement quality first. And I do believe that there's a hierarchy here. I think that it will be movement first. It's then the ability to resist force within that range of motion and then produce force within that range of motion. So when I look at the design, the question for me is what's the range of motion capability of all of our players? What's their ability to handle it when it's imposed upon them? And then how well can they produce force against it? Once you can kind of complete that basic wheel, then it's, okay, now what is the demand that is going to be placed on them? How often do they have to do this? How frequently do they have to do it? And then can they express all those other pieces that we just talked about above the rate of their demand, which is what I believe conditioning is, right? Like conditioning and fitness are very specific. So they're demand specific. And so those demands have to be met specifically. So then, yeah, taking an appraisal of what those demands are, and can the players and the athletes meet it, and looking at your program and saying very simply, does the program meet those three criteria? And if it doesn't, where doesn't it? And that's where we've got to essentially start to improve or implement, or whatever words you want to use. I'd said that there are two main phrases for me philosophically. The first one was what I just said, expressing force at critical ranges of motion above the rate demanded. And then the other piece, which I think can miss at times, is that you don't adapt to what you don't do. I believe that there is, and not that it's incorrect, and I could be incorrect, but I believe that there's a general thought now that you can do one thing and it will yield a different result, right? And and it's, as long as we're doing something, we will likely get what it is we're looking for. Again, when we talk about first principles of strength and conditioning, one of the main principles of strength and conditioning is that of specificity, right? Like we understand that if you want to yield a specific result, if you're looking for a specific result, you have to do that thing. There are other things that can support it, right? Like, don't get me wrong, right?
Yeah.
There are
Go.
right. Yeah, like there are other elements that will definitely support it. You can build a base, but at the end of the day, when we're talking about performance, you have to do that thing that you want if that's the result you expect to see. And I think that it sounds like when I say it, and I think when people hear it, it's like, of course, like that makes complete sense. Like, who isn't doing that? But then when you go in and look and you're like, you're not doing it, you're not doing it, you're not doing it, you're not doing it. You know what I mean? If you wanted to be honest about it, like if you wanted to honestly say, I want this, and I look at your program, I'd easily say, well, that's not what you're fucking doing. And I apologize if I'm swearing, but
Okay.
and you know what I mean? So for me, it's what do we want? Are we doing it? And then is the program designed to deliver it, right? Those are kind of the three main things that I look for.
And now go to our sports. So American football, rugby, two contact sports, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very different in terms of organization. Of course, depends on the positions the players play, but they have to be strong. They have to resist to lots of contact, lots of impact. So, do you saw a big difference in terms of designing programs and build all the programs from the players to the players?
Yes and no, and I of course there's a yes and no answer. So you're right. The sports are different, but I personally don't think they're as different as people think they are.
Okay.
Personally, so the needs if you're just analyzing the two sports and analyzing the people playing them, and you're going to write a program, everything that I just said, look at the demands, look at this, look at that. They'd be very similar on the surface. The critical difference, in my opinion, in terms of the programming, and is the length of time, both playing and being exposed and being away from it.
Exactly.
Right? And what I mean by that too is that a lot of people feel like, oh man, it's a challenge for you to program for 10 months on end or for 11 months. How are you going to program for 11 months? And quite honestly, it's easier because the players have adapted to things for longer. The longer you're doing something, the easier it becomes and the easier it is for you to recover from that thing, right? So what I've found for rugby players, and what is the tremendous challenge in the current state of affairs now with COVID-19, is that you'll find that rugby players are typically more collision fit, especially here in Europe. I know the schedule for Super Rugby is different, but here in Europe, we're playing 10 to 11 months out of the year. The players are tremendously contact fit. When we're playing for 11 months and training for 11 months out of the year, the players are incredibly aerobically fit. And I understand that there's a short break that we have where there can be an adjustment in fitness, but really, our players are never unfit. You know what I mean? Like there's never an extended period of time where they're going to dramatically lose a certain degree of fitness. Whereas in American football, there is an extended off season where technically teams cannot dictate or determine what the players do, right, with the collective bargaining agreement. So it is solely on the individual to maintain their level of fitness. Definitely no collision fitness, right? Yeah. So like there's definitely no collision the collision fitness goes away. So I think what you'll find in American football programs is there's a lot of having to start over. So the programs look the same, but while rugby players can stay in phase 4 or phase 5 of that program and you can pick it up right away, you always have to go back to phase 1 in American football and start from the beginning.
It's funny, and it's funny that you say that clubs or teams cannot say what they have to do after the season, especially in soccer or football or in rugby. Teams will say what they have to do during the holidays, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Because of that, because I don't know if I could say because of that, but what it does is it's in the interest of the player, really. Right. They would always say the best thing is to never get out of shape, because the hardest thing is to get in shape. So the easiest way to fix getting in shape is to just never get out of shape, right? Just always stay fit. And so, yeah, I think it's better.
Okay. Moving to rugby. And thinking now that we have this all, do you think we're going to start everything again with the preseason? Will be more games? Yeah, I'm here again.
Okay. Can you repeat? Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Can you repeat the question, Carlos?
So moving to rugby.
Yeah.
Okay. And during this COVID-19, so you think we start a new preseason? There is no more games?
I think we're going to have to. I think we'll have to. You know what I mean? Now, I think the question is how long will that preseason be?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So there's going to be a need to play games sooner rather than later, right? We have to start playing again, but at the same time, there needs to be a certain level of responsibility in terms of preparing the players, because, like I'd said, there are certain elements that the players just have not been exposed to, and quite honestly, with some of the conversations we've had, we've been very clear about it. But like I said, kind of taking it for granted, right? Like. This might be the first time in a long time for many of our players where they've gone 8 weeks without contact.
It never happens, as I remember.
It never happens, right? Like 8 weeks without contact. Like it never happens. I mean, even in our return to play protocols with injured players, there's some degree of contact because we have to keep contact fitness there. So yeah, how long the preseason is will be the big question, but whether there will be one, I think there has to be. If for anything else, for the contact fitness, right? The players need to be contact ready.
Okay. Now, as today is game day, what you guys do on the game day to prepare the game? In terms of more about fitness, you guys do something in the morning to activate. what is the game plan?
Yeah, so our game day protocol really is, and I think the philosophy is if we get to game day and there's anything else we have to do, we probably didn't manage the week very well, quite honestly. So by the time we get to game day, what we're not trying to do is impose much on the players from either a physical or a mental standpoint. We'd like to know that we there's a saying in the United States, the hay's in the barn, right? Like if you're a farmer and you've got the hay in the barn, then that's it. The players will have some kind of stretching done by a massage therapist. They'll have soft tissue work very specific to a particular player. It's not something that we enforce on the team. So in the morning, there's actually very, very little that we do. When we get to the stadium is where we'll start to ramp up our degree of movement and stretching and warming up even prior to kind of team warm up. There's a bit more organized preparation once we get to the stadium.
Of course, you guys are like professional. And for example, when I was in rugby and when I was we had to do like all that movement and I would say prayer movement and that warm up with all the group, because if we let the players alone, most of them will not do nothing.
Yeah. That is an incredibly fair comment, right? And it's a great point that you make, because one thing that I have noticed clearly, I've noticed it here, and I noticed it as soon as I got here, is that our players are very good about that. Our players are very good about the own, and I think that's probably why we've taken the position that we've taken. Like, it's game day. You've demonstrated you have a routine. You've demonstrated that the routine that you employ works for you. I'm not going to come in now and on the day of the game say, you know what, abandon your routine and just do what I've asked to do because I'm the head guy. So to be fair, I think that if players were not doing anything and didn't have ownership of it, that maybe we would endorse a bit more being done. But they've demonstrated that almost to every single person that's there on game day, they've got a very good routine. That prior to the global warm-up, because
exactly what I was saying.
Prior to the global warm-up, they've got a great routine that they run.
What we did was like the 10 minutes before the team warm-up. I do that 5 to 10 minutes specifically prayer movement, some dynamic stretching, some activations with them. So they do, because of course we are not professional, but we try to do the things as professional. And it's like you say, I think the players, and this is my vision, if you are, even if you don't receive nothing from the club, but you are playing for first division, you are playing to win championships or to do the best you can, I think you have to behave like a professional, and you have to do all these steps before the game. And it's something that also that I want to introduce or try to introduce in soccer, especially on the young ones, because what I saw this year is the pre-game is listen to music and playing soccer on the changing room, and that's it. And I think it's very important. And I think it's very important. They also activate and they do all that stuff. Even they are listening their own music, but and thinking about the game to prevent the injuries during the game.
Yeah, I do. And I feel like you're speaking to habit creation, right? Like it's kind of this development of healthy habits that hopefully we can instill in our players, like you said, so that they're able to maximize their potential. So no, it's great, and I think it's fantastic that that you're going to introduce that, because it sounds like it's not part of the culture, but it's something that should be.
Especially there is something that and I'm trying to bring from rugby to soccer world.
Good luck.
Yeah. No, I think it in a In the youth academy, I think it's easier to implement. It's easier to educate than in professional soccer, like you say, soccer or football, because when it's professional, they are making lots of money. So I think it's difficult for implement something. And if you educate players, like the young players, about their routine pre-game, I think it's much easier when they get there. They will do, because it's on their system.
There you go. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Denis, how is a week of training over there?
Week of training.
Let's always speak about our SNC, okay?
Yeah. So I think my general philosophy, my general belief, and it's one that will probably be different in a couple of years, so I probably shouldn't call it philosophy, but I believe that people, not players, but I believe that people handle frequency of exposure to intensity better than they do frequency of exposure to volume. So if you're asking specifically about the S&C department and the way that we approach training, one thing that I believe I know about rugby, especially training, is that it is heavy on the volume side, especially in training, right? The game might be a bit different. It's heavy on the volume side of training, but not necessarily heavy on the intensity side of training, right? I'm sure each team is probably different, but I would argue that maybe the majority of teams are not engaged in full contact all the time. I would venture to say, when people talk about American football and rugby being different sports, I think what they're primarily identifying is the consistency of ball in play, which means that there is a greater volume of running that takes place in rugby that people think versus American football. Whereas if you actually look at GPS data between American football teams and rugby teams and their training data, on some of them, they're actually very close to each other. In terms of total volume, the main difference is that training sessions in American football are longer to accommodate for the intensity of it. But if you were to just look number per number, the values are pretty close. So what that says to me is that with shorter training sessions and equal distance covered, it usually means the intensity is lower, which to me means that rugby players are generally conditioned through training to low intensity work. What I seek to do in the weight room is to introduce that intensity work to try and match the frequency of exposure so that they're not overexposed to submaximal work. And I think there's a tendency for just in general balance of good strength and conditioning practice to have mixes of volume and intensity, and to have periodization that's fairly linear, where volume is high and it progressively goes down, and intensity progressively goes up, and then you cycle your way through, and anything that you would have learned in school. For me, it's not. For me, I feel like at least I feel like we're at a deficit on the intensity side. I think we're at a deficit if we're looking at the nature of our week, to where you have an incredibly intense game, and it's intense, right? It's going to be 80 minutes. Like, we know it's 80 minutes. We know it's 2 40-minute halves. We know that now it's going to be full on bone with the intent of taking somebody else out, where even if we're going bone on bone in training, it may not be with that degree of intent, because it's common players. So there's a level of intensity that we know we're not going to match in training that will happen in a game. But even with that knowledge, it's almost like we then continue to dampen the training intensity. So then where can we supplement that? And in my opinion, we supplement it in the weight room.
That's great.
A typical week for us, Carlos, is we're going to have, I work off of an upper lower split. meaning I'm going to do lower body one day, upper body another day. There's a little bit of a mix. So it's not a true upper lower split, but it's definitely in terms of emphasis. And for a good amount of time, I don't care. It's going to be intense work, 90% plus. And I want our guys to adapt to being exposed to that regularly. It's not a phase. It's not a cycle. We train at 90 and above regularly because the frequency of exposure will cause adaptation. That's kind of what I feel.
And then with heavy loads or load?
Heavy loads.
Heavy loads. Always.
Heavy loads.
So
right?
short number of reps, right?
So yeah. So yeah, and again, if you're thinking a small number of reps in an acute session, right? So if you're like just looking at Monday, yeah, but if you realize that we did it Monday, Thursday, and Friday, by the time the week is over, it's actually no, you've actually probably done twice as much that you thought you would have done, and we spread it across the week so that they get more volume, they get more frequency of exposure, which should help with adaptation. But because it's not done in one singular session where we try to put it all in, it doesn't crush them. You know what I mean? Because I think what people feel is if I'm going to do a max effort day and I'm going to do this volume, then we're going to be, fatigued, right? There's going to be nervous system fatigue, which is not untrue, especially the way that we've conditioned people to think about it. But if I spread that out across the week, I can then do more in a single session without having to max it out, spread it out. They're exposed. We keep that side up. So as a general approach, that's the approach we take.
So your gym sessions are short, right?
So yeah, we try to keep the gym sessions relatively short.
You guys do it before the training session?
On some days, and on other days we don't.
Okay.
So yeah, on some days our gym will come first, and on other days they'll come second, again, depending on what we want to focus on. Yeah.
Okay. Great. So in terms of strength and for a rugby player, what do you value more? So it also depends on the positions, right? You guys design the programs, or you guys individualize the programs by the positions, because they need specific demands, right?
Yeah, and again, I think first answer is yes, we do. But globally, there's a general theme that I think all the players could utilize, right? I think what we found is by nature, forwards will probably be underpowered. They're bigger. It's harder for them to have greater levels of maximal strength, especially with the high aerobic demand from playing the game. Our backs are probably better from a relative strength standpoint because they're lighter. But unilaterally, from side to side, they're probably not as symmetrical.
Okay.
Right? So the global need that I think, again, that we can apply is strength, but where the strength needs to be applied, depending upon position, like you said, is where the change comes from. So you won't really find in this program one player working on strength, one player working on this, one player working on that. They're kind of all working on everything, but in varying degrees of emphasis depending upon the position that they're in. So again, like I said, I don't necessarily cycle the strength qualities. So you're not going to have one person in a strength phase and another person in a hypertrophy phase and another person in a power phase. We're going to be working on all of those things for everybody the entire time. It's just who has the dial turned up in one area for them will be slightly different than for someone else.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And that was and I work a little bit like you, when most like the program was designed more or less the same for every player. But sometimes, some coaches say like, oh, I think they guys need speed, these guys need and you are giving to them. So if you build, are you there? Denis?
Slow it down again for
Yeah,
us.
okay. So I was saying that if you build a nice program and you give everything on the program, like you say, short, you don't need to like do this guy is doing hypertrophy, or this guy is doing maximum strength, or these guys are doing power because they are the forwards need power,
Yeah.
because of the contact. But if you know, because I think, and if you see the game, they need everything.
Yeah.
Of course, the backs will run more, but nowadays the forwards have to also run
Yeah.
or more because they have to be everywhere.
Exactly. The game, I don't have an extensive history with the game, so I can't speak to the evolution of it. But what I can say is with my very new eyes, they're all kind of doing the same thing. You know what I mean? Like the game is actually a bit more homogenous than we think it is. And of course, when we're talking about scrummaging and very
Of course.
very very specific elements of the game, yeah, there are the differences. But the vast majority of the game, players are being required to do the same things. So yeah,
But
you
Dennis,
make a
and,
great
and,
point.
and you do specific, like, for example, in the gym session, for example, now you touch on the forwards. There is the specific work, for example, for scrumming, imagine, and you said to express force on that, on that levels of movement. Do you
Hmm.
guys work that on the gym, or then is after? So it's more specific, like you split the forwards, you go to the machine and you do there, or you try to load them sometimes in the gym that they can express force um, on that positions.
Yeah. So what I'll say is, it is just a general thought of mine in
Yeah.
any sport, um, where I don't necessarily introduce that because I'm not the subject matter expert in
Okay.
that regard. Although I welcome, and in this current scenario, what we do have is our forwards coach come down and saying, "Hey, man, I would like to work this and this after that set. Is it all right?" And it's like, "Yeah, we'll find out how you can work it in." So, like you said, the cross training takes place. So the working with that specific coach on a specific element that we really really feel could benefit from being paired up in the gym, because what we don't want to then do is then also have it be a rugby/gym session. That's something that I don't necessarily want as well. But if there's like a really good correlation that we can identify, then yeah, that does happen.
Because then the second line they have to jump. So there is some specific things that we have to work on that to
Yes.
improve. But sometimes it's like you said, you do the gym, but then if the coach come, and most of the times it can be extra the gym, or it can be like in the complementary exercises or something like that. But the
Exactly.
global, the main ones, it's for everybody.
Right.
Okay, great. Almost done. Um, I have to take
Going
some.
fast.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm joking. So in terms like okay, imagine like in an amateur setup, right? How can we try to improve, and how to we can integrate in not changing the mindset of the players, but tell the players how important is the nutrition, go to the gym. For example, now if you go pick up in Portugal, imagine the
Mm.
season is over now. I think there will no more rugby games, and most of the players, bang, done. They will do nothing because the championship will only start like September.
Mm.
How can we work on the players, and set up like the mentality of um, going hard, get strong, get faster. Not like all the importance of picking weights and heavy weights, but to like the movement skills part, uh, learning how to accelerate, how to sprint. How can we work on that? And because they know, like normally they like gym. It's gym. It's just putting weights. I have to be. I want to do hypertrophy. I want bigger muscles, and sometimes that is not the most important thing, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Of course, they need to build muscle, but they need out. how to accelerate. I think it's you touch on the point. It's express force. How can we manipulate that and speak to the head, the inside of the players? Like, because you guys are in a professional world, it's different. If I'm a professional, and especially in rugby, and Denis told the same thing, and Nick told the same thing. The mindset of them are perfect, right? Most of the players, bang, 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 done. This is what I do. But in other side, how can we? Do you understand my question?
I do. I understand your question, and you know, there's one thing that I guess I've got to be careful because I haven't worked in the amateur world, right?
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
can't speak to that. But one thing that I believe, Carlos, is that people are people, right? Humans are humans, um, and we've got professionals at this level that there are some players where you'd say, man, they do everything right. But we've also got more than a handful of players that aren't there, right? We also have more than a handful of players. And I'm not just talking about here, and I'm not just talking about in the rugby world. Definitely seen it everywhere, where they rely on their talent and they rely on the fact that they're incredibly good rugby players because that's what they played their entire lives, right? Like, one thing that I never try to get too far from my mind is that we're not working with professional training athletes. We're working with professional players. I mean that they play their game incredibly well, but all of these things that you're talking about, they are in the infancy of their understanding why it's important, how to do it, so on and so forth, right? So the first thing, and that's true at the professional level as well.
Yeah.
Right? So
In any
quite honestly, I do think it starts with team culture. And I do think it believes when you're saying how can we get it into the mindset of our players that taking as much time working on acceleration mechanics is just as good, if not better, than doing 20 bicep curls, because it's harder, it's easier to see, and the girls are going to love it. But you know what I mean? How do we get them to realize it? And quite honestly, I think it takes the village, man. Like, I think if your head coach hasn't bought in, if the position coach hasn't bought in, if the owner hasn't bought in, if the manager hasn't bought in, and is also asking those questions, if you are the only one that is saying it and no one else is saying it, it's not going to stick. It will stick with a couple of people. It will stick with the special ones that want to do that. But when you're talking about your team, it won't stick. So quite honestly, my answer is the buy-in has to start from the top, has to be reinforced from the top and driven down. And it has to be a cultural approach.
It's funny, and I was smiling because I had a guy at a live Instagram, and the guy asked me which strategies that I use to implement the things in the club. And my answer was, first, I have the board or the director of the club. He loves what I do. Second, I have the lucky that the coach understand how important this is. So it's easier to implement, like you say, it's easy to implement. And if I tell the coach, I need 10 minutes, and I'm speaking about, like, in general, I did the same thing in rugby. I had the chance to have with coach, especially Australian coach, that they give me green card to do whatever I want. And I think that is the most important thing, is that you have the buy-in for everybody, and the players will do it. And then the club will utilize that system, because it's difficult sometimes to do work without the ball. For example, in soccer, I want to work there because, and now with the data, we can see the trainings, even like if they are intense or not like you said before. For example, sometimes we have coaches that the training session is more technically, right? Mm-hmm. So we don't have that intense that we need for the game. Right. And I think, and this is my vision, we have to do it, or one, exercises without the ball, or second, I can do that in the gym session.
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have that buy-in of the coach,
And you know what, Carlos, I'm going to take it a step further, right? Because you're absolutely right. If you don't have the buy-in from the coach, then shit, your program's done. Period. In my opinion,
yeah, I
or
agree.
the battle will be too exhausting, right? But I'm saying I want to take it a step further, and what I will applaud our coach here for doing as well, and that's is not only is it their buy-in, but he also helps with the accountability of it. So like one thing that I would notice, one thing as a practice for us here is we meet as a coaching staff, all the coaches, S&C, the sports scientists. And in the morning, we will do an appraisal of how yesterday went. How did the attack go? How did the defense go? What was the conditioning like? What was and we had this tally. And the coach has bought into what I want to do. He's bought into the program. But what I realized is he wouldn't ask as part of that, how did the strength go, right? Like there was an assumption, yeah, I believe what you're doing is great, but it's still not front of mind that this is something that we have to keep accountable to. And I said, if you don't ask this question to me, you're definitely not asking the players, right? So if you ask the players, did they weigh in today because you're worried about their weight? And you ask the players if they slept today because you're worried about their sleep, but you don't ask the players how the lift went, it implies to them, whether we know it or not, that it is not important. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So for me, it was like it's not just buy-in, but it has to be part of the language all the time, because then the players subconsciously and consciously will make the connection that, whoa, wait a minute, this is really important. If I say no to this, then there could be a problem here. So that's when I believe it becomes a cultural piece, is when everybody's not only bought in, but also feels responsible for the accountability and that's to everything, right? So I got asked the same things, right? So I can't just say do that for me and then not ask,
Yeah, no.
So.
And I think like and during this quarantine, I've been watching, and I think we're going on one way that people or coaches are more how do you say, more worried about the individual,
Yeah,
than the programming and all that, sets and reps and loads and blah blah blah, because there is lots of scientific data, and I think we are forgetting about human being, and say like, Dennis, how was your night? Did you sleep well? No, Carlos, I didn't do shit. Okay, so today no heavy lifts. Go stretching or go on the bike, right? And do you agree that we are coming on this point? Because at the end of the day, what we want is the players fit as possible for the game day.
Yep.
And especially they don't get injured.
Yes. Yeah, I do. And I think we do a pretty good job here. And again, I can only speak to the current experience.
Yeah.
Where it's front of mind. It's definitely heavy on the program, like you said, but I think we're doing a pretty good job of also focusing on, like you said, on the person and making sure that we capture those elements.
Because with that, like when we are almost done with so much information, right? And you guys, especially in rugby, with the GPS data and all that stuff that they will give you during like the week, and then during the game, that the importance of you guys speaking every morning and decided like what to do, it's the main important thing, right? Like in terms of the training.
I spoke to a friend of mine who's in the NFL, and he's on the sports science side. He's been there for a while. We had a conversation last week, and he had an incredible statement. He said, we don't have a data problem, we have a knowledge transfer problem. To your point, there's an incredible amount of data that we have, and believe me, there's probably more data than we need. And we don't have a data issue, but we do. We've got a communication issue, right? We've got a decision-making issue. And I think people feel that the data will help with decision-making, but it really doesn't. It's how well you and I are in sync with what we want and how you and I then decide what we want to see, right? And so to your point, it's more important that we've built a culture where we have that kind of a meeting in the morning where we trust each other and how we're talking about things, and we trust what we feel and what we think is improving, as opposed to just saying, well, this is what we saw on the GPS, so we're going to do this today. Because if we go that way, we're going to get lost really fucking quick.
That will be my last question. And there is some question that I'm not a sports scientist. I'm more a guy that I like to be in the gym, in the field, and all that stuff. But I noticed that now that we have sports science, we have the doctors, and they come and okay, the data, the science says that we can only go X amount of meters per second, blah blah blah. Now they have to do extra time or extra meters in the end of the game. But to be honest, how we know that that player cannot go above that, or we cannot make them stronger? In not saying that it's not important, but don't be so specific by what science tells, because the studies go from different human beings. Not everybody's not the same, right? And sometimes what I see, it's oh no, because these guys in the end of the training they have to do because they didn't do, or they have to do less because the science says they only can go X amount of meters per seconds, or the volume. You understand what I'm saying?
I completely understand what you're saying, and again, that's why. And you're spot on. And I want to be careful here because
exactly.
we're recording this. But again, right at the beginning of this, you asked me when I go in and I look at something, and I said I've got two main philosophies, and my second was you don't adapt to what you don't do, right? The data will not tell you necessarily if you did what you wanted to do. It will tell you what you did, but it won't tell you if that's what you wanted to do necessarily. So you're right, but where I think there's a danger is to exactly what you said, because we're going to look at studies that are injury prevention based.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not necessarily championship winning based, right? A lot of the metrics that we're referencing are injury prevention metrics. They're not looking at what the South African national team did this year that prepared them to win the World Cup. They're going to look at all of the injuries that happened in preparation, and they're going to take that and say, this is what you need to keep your eye on. They're not going to show you what the best player did and maybe try to mirror that, to your point, right? So you're correct. So for me, it comes back to the question for the coaches at the end of the day. Did you get what you wanted? Because if the answer is no, but the numbers look great, I can tell you we're not going to win.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not. If you got what you wanted and the numbers look like, yeah, maybe they were really high or this, that, then we can make an adjustment if we feel it's necessary, right? Like, to your point, how do we know what the limits are? We don't know until you go there. You know what I mean? Like, we really don't. But at the end of the day, the coaches have to know, this is how I believe we're going to win. This is what we're going to do. And then what does the data then say? What did it take to get there? And then I do believe, Carlos, that the way that it should be done is a coach says, this is what it took for me to get exactly what I wanted. And you look at the data and it might be like, holy cow, you know what? This data, based on research, is showing that we did 2 times. In order for you to get what you wanted, it required us doing 2 times more than what the data said was safe. Can you get that with less? And if he says no, there's absolutely no way I can get what I want and what I think we need in order to win by doing less, then we, as the support staff, have to figure out how to make our players more robust. Right? Now, do I agree that the coach should just take that? No, I think there should be a middle ground, right? The coach figures out how he can be more efficient, because that's also what we want to do, right? Like if you could figure out how to get exactly what you wanted using less energy in this game, which is all about energy preservation,
Exactly.
going to make us a better team. So we're going to challenge you to get exactly what you wanted, but try and do it a little bit less. We'll make our players more resistant. Then that's a sweet spot. I think where most people are is coaches are kind of getting what they want. The data is kind of murky, and so we don't know where to go. And again, I still think it's because it's very young. I think this is all very new. And just like the synchronicity conversation that started this, that is plugged into this as well, right? The analytics side. How do we really make this function for us so that it's becoming a performance measure? Because undoubtedly, whether people want to admit it or not, the numbers we're using are injury numbers. They're not performance numbers. And people will tell you till they're blue in the face, no, we run a performance program. I'm going to call bullshit. The numbers that you're concerned about are based on injury.
And the studies are for that, right?
Exactly. The studies that are giving you those numbers are because people got hurt, not because they won. So let's just make that fucking clear.
And if you do more and they don't get injured now.
Exactly.
Because in the end of the day, and when we are in the competition world, and this is my thinking, I want to be better than the opposition. I want my players to beat the opposition. Period.
Yeah. Period.
And if I go to speak with the coach, I want my players to do 90 meters and smash the other guys. So this
if that's not your thought in this game, you're probably not going to survive. So you know what I mean?
No. Yeah. Oh, because they are tired. And there is way to manage. And sometimes if they get injury, we have to know why they get injured, because sometimes it can be, and I think I have this case this year that the guy had like not a big injury, but they pulled the hamstring.
Yeah.
And the guy was one of the fastest guy in the team. There was the guy who do more volume during the games. And we noticed that he didn't come to the gym on that week. And I asked him what happened. He said like, Cabe, I'm lots of exams on university. I'm studying a lot. Bang. And I told her, you should tell them, because sometimes we forget about, and kids, especially kids, they're studying a lot. They are not sleeping. And that is when we have to go to the coach and say, hey, because his stress is going to get injured. And that's it. And that's it there. Thanks for your, I think we got to the point, and it was a lovely conversation. And I love the way you think about SNC, and the way you put things, and that's what I like. That's what I like. I think we are the guys in the gym, and bang,
bang. That's it.
And yesterday it was funny. Yesterday I remember, and I finished with the guy asked me, who is the person that you had to choose as a coach? And I said, to somebody to coach me, and I take what you said to me in phase 3, and never forget about giving my presentation. Is like, I don't know how, but I will train with this guy.
I will never forget your coaching session.
You see?
I will never forget it, Carlos. It was amazing. It was amazing. I would.
Yeah. Said like, and I remember that phrase, and that was something that I keep in mind. It's like, I don't know why, man. I will train with this guy. And I think, and what makes us, I think it's the human part, and the way we love our job, and the way we care about the players, and our will of winning and be on the field, like with the players, and in the gym with the players, sweating with them. I think is what makes us sometimes different than other coaches.
Yeah. It's special. It's a special job to have. And, and thank you for thinking.
Thank you. It was amazing. Great. I still want to go visit you.
It's a bit harder now. As soon as you're allowed to fly,
No.
you're welcome.
Now I have the excuse for my wife because the babies are growing, so
Yeah, you can go. Yeah.
I can have time so they grow a little bit. But for sure, for sure.
Awesome.
Hey, Dennis, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I will put now this on Instagram, okay? So people
Awesome.
can watch our conversation. And once again, man, I hope to see you soon.
Cabe.
Not after 9 years.
Yeah. We'll see each other and talk to each other.
We'll
Sooner than 9 years, my friend.
Okay, Dennis,
All right,
thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Take care, bud.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.